We're going to begin to look at the gestures of sitting down into and standing up from a chair. I will be building on things we learned in the previous series that I put out on the torso, legs, arms, and neck and head, as these are not simple gestures. They involve a number of coordinated movements, so please understand that this is not necessarily the place to start if you're new. But I'll try to make this series as accessible as I can for everyone. While there are obviously connections between sitting down and standing up, they are different gestures, and so we'll begin with just sitting down. When you observe the average person sit down, you'll see that they do not control themselves through the gesture. There are exceptions to this, but generally when a person sits down into a chair, they will bend their legs, lower their body a bit, and then they will fall back into the chair. The evidence of this falling is abundant. Besides the fact that you can simply observe it happening, you can take note that many people will reach their hand back for the chair if they're asked to sit into a chair that is placed behind them. This is because you have to truly know where that chair is if you're going to fall into it. Think about this. If you were in control the whole way down to the chair, that is, you were doing the equivalent of a squat that just happened to be interrupted by the chair, you wouldn't need to worry about whether or not the chair is exactly where you think it is. Because if the chair isn't there, you will just go further into your squat, or stop and stand back up. But if you're going to fall back into a chair, there is a moment where you release yourself, and if the chair isn't there, you'll fall to the floor. So people who sit by falling have to know the chair is there. The second thing you'll find in those who sit by falling is that they land very far back on the chair. There are multiple factors to why this happens, and we'll explore them as this series continues. But most people end with their butt far back in the chair when they sit. Does it make sense for that to happen? Think about it. If you're standing in front of a chair, your butt might be just barely over the chair. If you're leaning a bit when you're standing, as most people do, your butt might actually be in front of the chair. As part of the sitting process, your hips will move back in space, no question. But should your hips move all the way to the back of the chair? That's quite a distance. As I said, we'll explore exactly why this happens, but a big part is the falling back of the body in the process of sitting. We typically want to sit on the edge of a chair when we sit, so that our sit bones are on the chair, but the backs of our thighs are not. We don't want to sit on the backs of our legs. We want to sit on our sit bones, which are at the bottom of our pelvis. The last thing I'll note is that when you fall back into a chair, you will have a more difficult time standing up. And you've likely noticed that many people, especially older people, have a hard time getting up out of their chair. Though you'll find that actually many young people struggle with this as well. It makes sense that if you've fallen into your chair, you don't have the leverage you need to stand back up, and so you'll need to make some manipulations before you'll be able to stand up. We started to examine this problem of lowering the body in a video in the series I put out on the legs. We looked at the new way of bending the knees, which is to bend at the knee and hip joints, but not the ankle joints. That is, your lower legs will stay unmoved while your hips go back. We'll look more at the specifics of that in the future, but for now, let's just think about the theory of sitting. The simple fact is that when you sit down, you will need to bend your hip joints, your knee joints, and your ankle joints. Sitting is, in a sense, bending the legs by bending these three sets of joints. It also involves leaning the torso and lowering the torso as the legs bend. Masoero is very specific about how we should sit down into a chair. He says that we should first bend only the hip joints and the knee joints, and not the ankle joints. This first phase will bring our hips over the chair. Then we should initiate the second phase, which involves bending the ankle joint as well and lowering the body to the chair. But there is an obvious question here. Why? Why do we want to hold off on bending the ankle joints? Many other Alexander technique teachers would say bend all three sets of joints from the beginning. Others might even say you can start by bending the ankle and knee joints, then add bending at the hip joints second, something Masoero would say is decidedly incorrect. It's really a peculiar thing. Could waiting to bend the ankle joints really make any difference? Are the movements that we make with our body really that precise? How could such a seemingly small difference in how you sit result in any meaningful benefit? And that is the question I want you to ponder. Do a little experimentation. Try to figure out what meaningful difference does it make to start by bending just the knee and hip joints versus bending the ankle, knee, and hip joints from the start in order to sit. You can also spend a little time observing yourself and others when they sit. See if you notice this falling into the chair. See if you or others land in the middle of the chair, at the front of the chair, or at the back of the chair. Then join me next episode, and we'll get the very specific, concrete answer to this question of when to bend the ankle when sitting. And we will really begin our examination of sitting down.